Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the latest edition. Yes, we are back after a short break. The latest edition of News Talk. I'm Stephanie, and as always, I'm delighted to be joined by David. Hello, David.
Hello, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As usual, we're going to talk about three hot topics in the news. We're going to be talking about, what we think about them, and we want to hear your opinions. So please chat to us in the chat.
Absolutely. I mean, the title of the show is News Talk. We really want you to get you talking. So we've chosen three very different stories, but stories we hope that you will be interested in. There's lots of great vocabulary to listen out for and to practice. And as always, please do let us know your opinions on these topics.
Let's have a look at the three topics, shall we?
Absolutely. Off we go, David.
So the first one we're asking, and I think we did this because there's a new report out, and this is really quite surprising, or possibly not. But the question is, what is India's biggest problem? What do you think?
So, very serious topic, number one. Number two, something completely different. We're moving to a different topic in a different country. We're back in the UK and we're asking why were Charles and Harry, so we're talking royal family here, why were they both in London and did they meet? If you don't know this, what do you think? Have a guess.
Yeah. What do you think about King Charles and Prince Harry and how much they are in the news? And then finally, for the biggest song contest in the world, I believe, did you watch it? So we're asking the question, which country won Eurovision? And do you care? Maybe you don't, but it'll still be interesting to hear.
Absolutely, a huge phenomenon, Eurovision. So do let us know. Did you watch it? What do you know about it? How did your country do if your country took part? So three very different topics. Please do let us know what you think. We're going to kick off today with story number one. So story number one, we're asking, what is India's biggest problem? And as David said, this is off the back of a new report that has just been published.
Yeah, I mean, and it is rather surprising because, of course, as you will know, India now is has the biggest population in the world, and also in terms of its economy, it is already number five, I think, in terms of GDP, gross domestic product, and it's very likely that it will move up to number three or number four in the world. So this means it's a very, very rich country.
Thomas, hello. Thank you for joining in. Greetings to Greece. Any ideas, Thomas? What do you think about this story? What problem do you think we're going to be talking about here?
So this is India, which now has a population of 1.4 billion people. And yeah, it's also, of course, going through elections, general elections at this time. And the results, I think, will be out next month because it's a very long voting process. And the economy is, as I was saying, it's expected to grow about 8% in 1 year. So um,
Hello, Inna. Thank you for joining. I've typed the question in the chat so we can all see. We're asking, what problem does India have? As David says, a growing economy, a very populous country, a very, very large population. What problem do you think they could be facing? Any ideas?
and it's to do with food, to give you a clue. Um, and again, this is why it's so surprising because I think India is what is it, Stephanie? It's the biggest
Second.
producer of milk. I believe it's the
Okay.
top producer,
Top
and then
producer. Yeah.
it's second in other staples like rice and wheat and vegetables
And
and
sugarcane.
sugarcane.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hello, Stathis. Thank you for joining. Yeah, so a big producer among the largest producers of agricultural commodities. And yet, despite this fact, despite the amount of food it's produced, this big problem.
Shall we shall we explain what we
I
found
think
out?
we're going to, David. Yes, over to you.
So the biggest problem facing India, according to this new report, is is hunger. It's people who are literally starving. There is something like, out of a population of 1.4 billion people, there are 190 million hungry people.
Absolutely. I think we've got two correct guesses there, Simon and Stathis. Well done. Yes, shocking this, isn't it? Considering, as we said, the amount, one of the largest producers of agricultural commodities, and yet the numbers of people starving. And also, David, I was reading that people, even people who are getting food, it's not necessarily nutritious food. They aren't getting the nutrients from the food.
Yeah, and it's interesting to read the reasons for this, and I think yeah, and public health is that's a good point. That's another massive issue, but the I think the problem is with the supply chains and the distribution network and how food gets from one place to another. And I think I read somewhere that it's almost non-existent. It's very difficult for people to actually access food. And I think
Absolutely, and even food when the food is produced, then it then has to be stored, doesn't it? And when you're talking about a country with hot temperatures, having access to cold storage in order to prolong the life of fresh vegetables and fresh fruit is really critical, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, good points as well. I mean, is there an issue of overpopulation, and the environment, and the environment is having a big impact because, of course, of the weather, which has affected crops. And I think
Mm.
that's what drove the government to stop the export of a number of these staples.
And I think because the weather has been so erratic, it's very difficult to predict, isn't it? And of course, farmers need to predict what the weather's going to be like in order to plant food and to harvest food. So that sort of erratic and unusual weather has had a huge impact on industries such as agriculture and farming.
Well, and that we're having the same in our country, which is surprising, isn't it? Because of the amount of rain we've had, then it has really absolutely caused terrible problems for farmers in the UK, and I suspect that this will be the same in other countries as well.
Absolutely. And as you were saying, David, in order to try to counteract this, the Indian government has banned exports of certain things such as onions and other staple food items such as tomatoes, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a very, very, very big problem. Shall we have a look at the
Yeah, let's
vocabulary?
have a look at some of the vocabulary that's come up on this. So the question was, what's the biggest problem? And as Stathis and Simon correctly identified, the problem, of course, is hunger. And despite being, well, as we said, a huge producer of agricultural food, one of the biggest problems it faces is starvation and people, millions of people going hungry.
And thank you for sharing that as well, Simon. In Bangladesh, you face the same problem because you're very vulnerable to climate conditions, heavy rain, floods, and cyclones. Yeah, yeah, I feel for you. Um, and we were talking about, yeah, people are literally starving. And if you starve, the verb starve, then you die because you don't get enough food.
And we said even if people are getting food, it's not necessarily good quality food. It's not nutritious. So nutritious means containing many of the substances needed for life and growth.
And we also talked about staples, food staples. A staple is the main product or part of something. And we talked about staples in food, such as rice, milk, wheat, etc.
Good. On to story number two then. So, as always, a completely different topic. This time we're talking about the royal family, the British royal family. We're talking about King Charles III and his son, one of his sons, Prince Harry. Of course, they've had a very famous and public relationship in recent years, haven't they? Lots of difficult things happening. But they both happened to be in London last week. The question is, does anybody know why? And do you think they met?
And this is because of course they both appear in the newspapers around the world all the time, and it was of course it was quite important that the question was, will they meet, will they meet, because of the bad feeling. There's the Harry is estranged from the royal family, so what was their reaction going to be? And of course, King Charles, has been recovering from cancer treatment. And so this was his first public appearance for quite some time. So it was quite significant, actually.
I think it's very interesting because at the end of the day, they are a family. And I think, like many families, I think it's something we can all relate to. Families, perhaps at certain times, have disagreements, have arguments, have falling outs with certain family members. But of course, for the rest of us, this doesn't take place on the
Yeah.
front page of newspapers, on news shows. You have a falling out with somebody in your family and it happens behind closed doors. But of course, for them, this is all played out on the world stage, isn't it?
In the media. And of course, I mean, the royal family is a significant and an important institution in our country, but I'm sure in your country, maybe you don't have a royal family. I mean, what do you think of the royal? Are you at all interested? Maybe not, and I think that would be perfectly fine. But lots and lots of people around the world are very much interested. And of course, the whole point about our royal family, I think, is that they do genuinely do a lot of good work, especially for charities and good causes.
And raising the profile of things, David, I think that's really important, isn't it? When they sort of champion something, the profile is inevitably raised because of all the media attention that comes with it. So I think that is a very valid point.
Yeah, yeah. So did they meet? I think you probably guessed the answer by now, that the answer is no. They didn't meet, so they are still not talking to each other. They are not speaking to each
And of
other.
course, I think when Harry is in America and King Charles is in England, I mean, obviously that's a very good excuse, isn't it? Well, we're on other sides of the world, but when they're both in London at the same time, attending events. I mean, one event was in Buckingham Palace, and another event was at St Paul's Cathedral, I believe. Which, I mean, they're not too far apart, are they?
They're very close, but they were both attending two very good causes as well. So, Prince Harry, I don't know if anybody knows, he's part of, or he was the instigator, of the Invictus Games. This was started in 2014, and the whole idea is to help and support uh, soldiers and servicemen who have been wounded or injured, and to give them an opportunity to participate in this wonderful games, these sports.
I think it's kind of, I mean, perhaps a way of sort of thinking of it is like the Olympics, isn't it? But for injured or wounded military personnel. So, it's a very inspiring cause, I think, David.
Yes, it is. It is, and it's one that's very close to Prince Harry's heart, and he's been involved for 10 years. So that's fantastic. And he came back specifically because of that. So it was a duty, I think, and he's very good at meeting people and encouraging them to get involved in these sorts of things. And on the other hand, if we look at the king, what was he doing,
Well,
Stephanie?
I believe he was attending a royal garden party at Buckingham Palace, which I have to say does sound rather delightful, doesn't it? A garden party in the spring with some wonderful tea and cakes and sandwiches. I think that all sounds rather nice.
Well, it is. It's of course it's very, very British. This so the king and the queen and members of the royal family, they hold, I think it's about three garden parties in the grounds of Buckingham Palace every year, and something like 30,000 guests are invited over the period. And the idea is not for, the cream of society. It's for everybody. And from all different walks of life, different jobs, different professions, different backgrounds. So it's supposed to be an inclusive event. But it does. The idea is to reward, to say thank you from the royal family to members of the public who have done something maybe special or helped in some special way. And it's a really nice concept, I
I think
think.
it's a lovely concept. I mean, if I was invited, I would definitely go. David, have you ever been invited to such a
Well,
prestigious event?
I have been to a royal garden party,
Oh my
actually.
goodness.
Now it wasn't me. They didn't invite me directly, but they invited a friend of mine, and I went along,
You
and
were
it
the
was
guest.
fantastic. I was a guest, and the Queen was there, and all different members of the royal family, and about 10,000 other people. But you walk around the grounds of the palace, and then you have your tea, you have
Well, this
your
is what I'm
sandwiches.
interested in, David. What was the food? Did you have some amazing cakes and tea? What was the
I wouldn't describe them as amazing, but they were nice, finger sandwiches, different
okay?
types, and little cakes and cups of tea. Very, very English or very British.
I was going to
Um,
say it's very British, isn't it? But I think what an amazing experience, and especially to have been invited when the Queen was alive and to have that experience.
so she walked along straight in front of us, and sometimes she stops and speaks to people, but she didn't stop to speak to us. But
And
we
isn't
saw.
there a rule? I mean, you can't approach the Queen, can you?
No,
You have
no,
to
no,
wait to
no.
be
Oh, yeah,
spoken
you told me.
to.
Yes,
Mm.
yes, yes. But it was a great. It was good fun and a great experience. And I think it's a really nice thing that happens in this country.
I think also that sense of tradition, isn't it? It's something that's been going on. I don't know how many years, but it's certainly something that's been going on for a considerable amount of time. And it's that lovely sense of tradition. And as you said, it's a way of saying thank you to people who've supported good causes, who've done charity work, or I mean, people who've served industries such as teaching, for example, for many, many years, get invited as a sort of thank you for this.
And yes, indeed, and of course, it's all part of the ceremony. So you have to stand and wait while the national anthem is played, and then the king at this stage, the king makes his appearance, and then he walks down the steps and greets the guests at the party.
And I'm imagining, David, that you wore a very smart suit.
His suit, yes, yes.
Yes, I mean, that would be like the top priority, wouldn't it? What to
You
wear to such an event.
I know, but he has a top hat and the works, but the guests, as long as you wear a suit, that's absolutely fine.
What a fantastic experience. Shall we have a look at some of the vocabulary, David?
Yes. So
We had two questions here, really, didn't we? We were asking why were they in London and did they meet? And as we said, while King Charles III welcomed guests for a royal garden party at Buckingham Palace, Prince Harry was marking the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games.
yeah, and as we say, most countries, I believe, have a national anthem, which it can be more popular or not. But so a national anthem that I mentioned that is always played in the presence of the royal family at any events, like if you go to the theatre and there's a member of the royal family, then they play the national anthem. And so this is really it's a patriotic song. It's the official song of the country, and it's adopted by the country as an expression of national identity.
And then we have the verb to host. So King Charles III was hosting this royal garden party. To host, you can also be the host, which he was, but he was providing the space and the other things. So in this occasion, it was cakes and tea and sandwiches necessary for a special event.
And as I think I mentioned, yes, they are estranged. So Prince Prince Harry is estranged from the other members of the royal family, his father and brother in particular. And if you are estranged, then you are no longer friendly or in contact with a person.
Absolutely, and thank you for your comment there, Simon. Difficult indeed, especially if you're living on and on other sides of the world.
Yes, it is.
Let's move on then to our final story today. So big story. I mean, it is a big news story, isn't it? Over here in Europe, Eurovision. This huge singing contest kicked off last week. There were various rounds. We had a quarter final, a semi final, and of course, at the weekend was the big final. So, what we're asking is, do you know who won? Did your country take part? What did you think of your song? And perhaps, do you even care? That's what we'd like to know for story number 3.
Number 3. So can I ask you, Stephanie, first of all, did you watch Eurovision?
Well, David, I don't normally, but this year I did. I do have to say it was rather long. I felt like I'd been watching it for a long time, and I was thinking, I wonder how much longer. And then I found out there's like 26 countries in the final, and we'd only watched about 12. So it was quite a long program to
It,
watch.
it is. I think you've got to be a real fan to see it through to the end. But as we said, this is the biggest music competition in the world. I think it regularly has, total viewing across all continents of about 160 million people. So there is a lot. It's very, very popular.
And of course, there are super fans. I mean, when you watch the program and they show everybody out on the streets, they show the audience, people dressed up, very patriotic, people with their faces painted, waving their country flags. I mean, it's a nice concept, isn't it? There's a song that represents your country. It's taking part in this event. I think, though, we have to say that this year there was a feeling that a lot was overshadowed a bit by other events.
I think yes, two in particular, really, weren't there? I think well, or really the war in Gaza, and I think there's a big question, really, whether as an artist, how do you feel? Should you be allowed to express your opinions about something that is happening that is not directly related to the event? So there were a number of artists who signed a letter, and basically that letter was all about asking for peace. But the organizers prevented any singer from actually talking and saying anything.
And I think that's a really valid point. I mean, I think we can also look at sport in the same sort of idea that, sports events take place and people should be able to play sport, but often it gets turned into a sort of political event. And should these things actually be kept very separate? I mean, very interested to know what people think about this because, as David said, a lot of the singers taking part in the competition said they felt conflicted. They wanted to express what they thought, but they weren't allowed to do that because the organisers said this is a singing contest. You come and you sing. So, what do people think about that?
And should you be loud? I think that this whole idea of showing solidarity with protesters, for example, should you be allowed that or not? Should it really just be limited to this is a song contest, sing? Well, it's very, very conflictive, I think, for everybody who's there.
Absolutely, and of course, on the other side, we can just enjoy the entertainment. I mean, there are some very strange acts, I have to say. Some of them are a little bit bizarre, but some flamboyant costumes. I mean, some great
Absolutely.
design going on there.
Which you always expect with Eurovision, isn't it? Some part of it's the singing, a lot of it is the
The
costume.
performance, yeah. And I think this year more than ever, the way the stage was sort of laid out really lent itself to that high performance factor, and all the backing dancers and the special effects I thought were really quite dramatic this year as well.
Yeah, yeah. And there's always a big issue as well about who sings in what order, because they always reckon if you're the one if you are the act that kicks off the show, the first act, then the chances of you winning are virtually zero. But as I understand, this year people were allowed to vote before the performances were even.
I didn't understand that, I
Well,
have to say, because it seemed to me that therefore the people at the beginning had an advantage because the phone lines were open longer. So I didn't really
true.
quite understand how that, unless I missed something, how that was going to work.
I know, and there's that other weird thing as well. I think that you have your jury votes. So these are supposedly, each country has a number of people in a jury, and they decide a number of votes. And then you have the popular vote. So that will be people like you and me, and we can vote on our phones,
But not for your country.
but not for your country. But in the end, they seem to have far more votes than the jury does. So I don't
I
understand that.
don't really understand the voting system. However, I do know we're not allowed to vote for our own country. David, what did you think
Indeed.
of the United Kingdom song?
I thought it was okay. So I think it was fair.
Diplomatically put there, David.
I think it was okay. So I think it was in the middle, which is I think
Hmm.
where it finished in the end. Did you enjoy it? Did you like it?
I thought it was okay. I'll go with you on that one, David.
Well, I don't know. Does
Apparently
anybody?
they had
Did anybody
sound
have?
issues.
Oh,
They were
really?
complaining about that. I don't know. I watched it and it
Oh,
didn't seem to affect what I saw, but not a super fan of the UK song, I have to say.
no. I mean, what did anybody see any songs that they enjoyed, even from their own country? Um, I mean, I did. No, did I see any?
Well, I watched everybody, but a lot of them, I have to say, when you've got 25, 26 songs, it's a lot to remember. So I think perhaps that's why the more dramatic ones, the more sort of extrovert and flamboyant performances stick in your mind a bit more. Perhaps that's a bit of a tactic there as well.
Maybe. So did you work out who was going to win?
No, I
No.
didn't watch the voting. After watching all the songs, I was quite tired. So I thought I'd wait till the next morning to see who the winner actually was.
So, and did you find out?
Yes.
Share, tell us.
So the winner this year was Switzerland.
Switzerland again.
Switzerland were the
Well,
winners. So let's go to the, shall we go to the,
well, I was going to ask you a couple of
oh,
questions
okay,
before we go
yes.
to the end.
Let me
So,
go to, oh,
yes, so we know Switzerland has done very well. Do you know which are the most? And please join in. Help Stephanie if you
please.
can.
I was going to say, David always has these statistical quizzes that can be quite tricky. So
So,
please do
which
help.
are the most successful Eurovision countries?
I
There are
know
two.
this. I know this.
Go on then.
I'm going to guess, but I'm pretty confident on this. I'm going to guess Ireland and Sweden.
Correct. How many countries participated this year?
Oh, overall, well, that's a tough one because I know there were 25 or 26 in the final, but there
Correct.
must have been more before that, though, in the semi-finals that were
Correct.
knocked out.
Yes. Yes. So there were 30,
50?
37.
37, okay. Well, they didn't
37.
knock out that many then. Okay.
And do you know how long? What is the maximum length
Oh, I
a
read
song
this.
can be?
I read this and I've forgotten. I did know. Um, 2 minutes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay.
3 minutes is the maximum, as you can understand. Otherwise, you could go on forever, couldn't you? And final question here is how many countries performed partly or fully in a language other than English? Because
Yeah.
today, nearly all of them sing in English, but
But it was quite
any.
interesting because I did notice this with the final that there did seem to be a lot of countries that were not singing in English, which I think is fantastic. I mean, absolutely. I think singing culture, singing your language. I think it's expression, and I'm all for that. 13.
Not bad. 10. There were 10
Okay.
countries actually of the 25, which is, yeah, yeah. But of course, they do it because it's going to sell.
Yeah.
If they sing in English, then that's the biggest market.
In
So
fact, in some of them I saw when they were introducing the act, they were saying that this song is already a huge hit. And of course, that's much more likely to happen if you're singing in English, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. Oh, and one final question. Are all the countries from Europe?
No,
No, no,
no.
despite the Eurovision Song Contest, because
Don't know. I did ask this on the night.
Australia Australia is always has been part of the Eurovision Song Contest since 2015, for a long time. And
Ah,
apparently the reason is because it's a broadcaster that's part of the European Commission,
the
will some say
EBU, yes.
EBU, and because it's part of that, I think is allowed to perform. But it would be weird, wouldn't it, if Australia won,
It would
because
be
then
weird.
the following year, everybody would have to go over to Australia to perform the Eurovision Song Contest in Australia.
That is a very, well, would be a very strange situation.
It would, wouldn't it?
Let's have a
So
look at some of the vocabulary there then. So, our question, of course, and the answer, Switzerland are this year's Eurovision winners.
and oh yes, we talked about kicking off as we do in football and sports. If you kick off something, then you begin it. And I think we were talking about the first act to kick off the show.
I use the next word a lot. I was talking about flamboyant performances, flamboyant costumes. What a great word, flamboyant. It means different, confident, and exciting in a way that attracts attention, which is, of course, what all the acts were hoping to do.
I always think of the carnival in Brazil, of
It's a
flamboyant
great,
costumes,
yeah,
aren't they? They're like,
absolutely.
yeah, and we also talked about solidarity, and singers wanting to show solidarity with protesters or other people. And if you show solidarity, you give support. So it's support by one person or a group of people for another because they share the same feelings, opinions, and aims, etc.
Fantastic. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of News Talk. So, big thank you to all of you for joining us. We
Joining
really
us.
hope you found those stories interesting. We will be live again next week, same time, same place, with 3 more stories.
See you then. Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.